Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Jenna Morton.
And I'm Tosh Taylor. And on today's show, we have a guest that you have seen on the show, but I'm pretty sure it was during the pandemic the first time. Mm-hmm. We have Carolynn Dube with us today. Carolynn is the Executive Director of Fertility Matters Canada. Last time we spoke with you, we spoke about your fertility journey. You have 3 beautiful boys. Mm-hmm. Today we're going to talk about kind of life after that. But first, let's tell everybody about the journey in the short form and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So thanks for having me back. My husband and I sort of did what society tells you to do. We got our educations, we had our jobs, we met, we got married, bought a house and a car, and then of course started to try to have a family, and it wasn't happening. All of that to say, I had a manager who had educated me on reproductive health early in my 20s, and because of that conversation, I was able to kind of identify quickly that maybe this is something we should talk about with our doctor. Thankfully, we did end up with male infertility issues, did IVF or fertility treatment, and we now have 3 boys. 1 is 9, and our twins are 4.
Wowza.
Yeah. It's wild.
And it happened over like how long of a period of time?
So the whole time, sort of from start figuring out that, like, starting to try to have a family to the birth of our first was about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And then another addition, there's 5 years between my eldest and the twins. So 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Which is a very fast timeline for a lot of people in the fertility world.
Definitely, especially when you're adding multiple children to your family. That's relatively, and we know how fortunate we are because not everybody who needs to access fertility care will actually come home with a baby at the end of the day.
Can you talk a little bit, not just about your story in particular, but in general, that idea of, where we are with fertility stuff in Canada and how you ended up in the role you are with the organization?
Sure. So this conversation is actually really timely. Yesterday, new data from the World Health Organization has come out. Previously, we had said 1 in 6 couples globally and in Canada experience fertility. And of course, it's not just heterosexual couples that experience or need access to fertility care. So yesterday, we now have new data from World Health Organization. 1 in 6 people worldwide are in need of fertility care in order to build their families. So it's really prevalent when you think about your social networks. I'm sure whether or not actually you know people, I know both of you have people and stories within your own lives of people who have struggled. And even if, for viewers, if you don't, with a statistic like 1 in 6 people, certainly there are people that you work with who are in your family, who are in your friends circle that are struggling. The reason I am where I am today, I've been the director with FMC for 8 years, and we were living in Halifax at the time. My eldest was born, and I started advocating there because I wasn't able to access a lot of support online. That sort of felt like the community that understood what I was going through. And fertility, we had a medical issue that is not covered. We didn't have healthcare coverage for this disease that we had. And we live in a country where we cover disease. So I started advocating and working with the local clinic. And then my husband actually was in the military at the time. We were transferred to Montreal while I was on maternity leave. And this job came up when we were living in Montreal. Their home base was actually in Montreal, and the manager that I had many years ago, who was educating me on my reproductive health as a young 20-something, had said, "Hey, Carolynn, this job has come up and I think you should apply." It's very full circle, and I will be forever grateful for her. So this organization, FMC, has been around for over 30 years. And so we are able to provide support and education and do advocacy work on behalf of every Canadian who needs access to care.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. That is very full circle.
It's
wow.
Very full circle, yeah. It's very like full circle of life. That is not lost on me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So with FMC, there is many different avenues, and you've just, and I want to talk about it quickly, you just released a podcast that I have to tell people it is an absolute must listen to, because you are interviewing so many different aspects. And as someone who, like you said, it's 1 in 6, but I at least knew or know people who are going through it. I didn't realize how many different avenues and different ways that people could start a family or not start a family. So I want to thank you for doing that podcast, because I think whether it's someone dealing with it themselves, or if it's a friend, then you can educate yourself, or a family member, you can educate yourself on how to properly talk to these people, or to help in any way that you can, or to just understand their journey.
Absolutely. So our podcast is called Fertility in Focus. And we're actually working with Tosh on that program. So thank you, Tosh.
Plug.
It is a total shameless plug. But truly, you have helped elevate, and I appreciate you saying that, because for people who may not be walking this path, who may have not gone through a fertility journey, listening to the fertility experts that we interview and the different patient stories is so impactful, and it really can help you understand how to better support someone in your life, whether or not they're currently, you're currently connected with them, or someone who may come into your life. It really does help paint that picture.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it's like in your family right now, and what kind of conversations you have with your boys around fertility and families, and how that plays into your family dynamic.
That's a great question. So it's so interesting. We've always been very open with our boys about, sort of that conception story was easy, because we actually could say the doctor created you in a dish and put you inside my belly. So that was always very easy. But what's so cool is, because we've had those conversations, and my eldest is 9, and he's very intuitive on these things, and says he understands that families are built differently. So not everybody, for example, you don't just need to have a mom and a dad who are married to have a baby, because we do support, and fertility care is for everybody. So he understands that if you're a single person and you don't have a sperm and an egg, because he does know what those are now, that you can go to a doctor, and there are supports, and that's what I help do, that you can have a baby and create a beautiful family, whether or not you have a partner. You just might be missing a few pieces. You may be a same-sex couple, 2 men who need a belly and an egg from someone to give that gift to you. So we have those conversations very openly. My twins are still they're too chaotic to sort of focus on those conversations at this point of their life. But it's really important. It's important to sort of destigmatize, because there is so much stigma and shame. It's very challenging for someone who has been diagnosed with infertility to talk about it. I mean, you both know me. I am very type A. I'm very vulnerable. I share a lot. But when we had this diagnosis, I shut down for a good 6 months and told nobody. And it was really, looking back now, I think, oh my gosh. So if that was impacting me that way, I can only imagine the impact on other people who aren't as open, or who don't have as close family and friend networks and those types of things. So it's really important for us to continue to have open conversations, because it's 2023 and this amazing medical technology exists, and we are able to build amazing families. It is very expensive, but the more people can use their voice to share, it makes the loneliness, the isolation, those feelings that come along with a fertility journey, it makes the people that are walking that path feel much less alone.
So now that we're using the term life after, but like you are still very much in it, and I find from, like you said, working on these podcasts with you, that the people that have got their family now, they were able to bring home baby or weren't able to bring home baby, and they've made that decision, they still advocate a lot. But how does it feel after? Like, honestly, when the twins were born, how did you feel after? Like, your journey with that was done.
Yeah, that's, so the moment my twins were born, I remember a moment in the hospital. And I mean, I had an easy pregnancy, an easy delivery. And I just felt relief, because I knew at that point my fertility journey was over. And there had been a very long period of time at that point, probably 6 years, maybe 5 years, 6 years for sure, where it was heavy. My husband and I were not on the same page all the time. It is really challenging on relationships. There's that constant, like, month after month, I'm not pregnant. And then you have a baby, and then there's the secondary infertility, like, I have to do this again, and I should be thankful I have one. So there's a whole other guilt that is associated with it. So for many years, I lived with that, people live with that. And because I was in it all the time, because I was supporting other people while I was going on my own journey, when I went on maternity leave, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to come back because I was so burnt out from the fertility. And then I remember being on maternity, like being on leave and just saying, holy smokes, I can't give this up now. My journey is over and I have a voice, and that isn't weighing me down anymore. And I will continue to advocate to ensure that people have the support, the education, the information they need to make educated decisions, so that they feel like they have the information they need to know that the options are available to them. And eventually that, Canada recognizes infertility or fertility as a disease for everybody who needs access to care, and that we get a fertility strategy in place in this country. And so that's what we're working on next. So the relief was enormous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit about that work that the organization has done over 30 years plus now, but particularly I know in the last few years, you guys have made some great strides in terms of what is available and what private companies are doing to support employees, that type of thing. Talk a little bit about where we stand with all that right now.
So we're seeing definitely an uptake in organizations across the country, globally really, supporting fertility and family building in the workplace. So bigger companies, the top 5 banks, for example, have all implemented fertility and family building benefits over the past sort of 18 months. And that's amazing because there's so much data around it that shows that not only do you attract and retain young talent, those are the benefits that this younger generation is looking for, but also there is a huge amount of, like, the impact on your mental health when you're diagnosed with infertility is comparable, and the research shows this, to a more significant health diagnosis, such as cancer. And we don't treat it the same. And so if you're, for men who have male factor infertility, trying, like, activities of daily living, the depression, the anxiety, it's hard and it impacts everything, including your employment. And so part of the mission of our organization is to ensure that all the stakeholders who can take a piece of the pie are actually educated on how they can alleviate that stress. So we're working with not only provincial and federal governments to look at the medical side, but also encouraging employers to implement fertility benefits. The average cost of an IVF treatment in this country is $20,000. And that's paid upfront for the most part, out of pocket by a patient, and with no guarantee of a baby at the end. It's very expensive, and many people need to do several rounds in order for them to take that baby home. And so if employers are seeing that, and they want to support women's health, family building, and it also is very supportive of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So supporting family building for members of the LGBTQ community in your organization, single people, whether that's a female or a male, that's an amazing benefit that many employees are able to access. We still have a lot of work to do, and we do have a campaign called Fertility Benefits Matter, where we support employees to have that conversation with their employer or their insurance company. And we help work with insurance companies and employers to educate them on why this makes sense.
So you just said you have still a lot of steps to make, and that made me think of the language that's used around. I can remember we had took us 6 years to get pregnant with our first, and then the in between, which is only 2.5 years from birth to birth, It was, when are you having another one? When are you having another one? These are ridiculous questions that should never be asked, because you don't know what people are going through. Do you find that language is changing? Like, is Fertility Matters Canada educating people more on I don't know, the way to properly speak, if there is, or just be quiet and wait?
That's right.
See what happens. Yeah.
That's a great point. And it's a way that we can, sort of, there is a shift happening. And I think with social media, so many more people are more vocal, especially on Instagram and TikTok, where you're able to kind of hide behind a bit of a handle. It's not sort of personal. Facebook, I don't see it as much. We are seeing a shift, and it's part of the language and the education that we do, especially through our social media channels. But you're right, it's not appropriate, no matter who you are, to ask someone whether you don't know if they want to have children, whether they are struggling to have children. There's a whole slew of reasons. It's just not appropriate, so just don't ask. And it is challenging. You go to family gatherings, you're seeing baby announcements and baby showers. So yes, there is a bit of a shift in how we see, but there's still some work to do. And it's just continuing to advocate and educate, really. We don't want to make people feel bad, because they're not saying it to be malicious. It's just that they don't know. And the other thing I will say is that if you know someone is struggling, don't give unsolicited advice. The things like, oh, you need to go on vacation, you just need to relax, maybe you should put your feet in the air, it's God's will. All of those things are not helpful.
No.
So just ask your friend, like, listen, you can say, I haven't been there, I don't know, this is not my experience, but I am here for you. If they've experienced a miscarriage or a loss, and you know the due date of the baby, maybe send them a text on that day to let them know you're thinking of them. There are little ways that you can be there for your friend without providing advice that's not really helpful and can actually really be hurtful.
Yeah, that's so important. And I do think as a society, we seem to be getting better at all of that, but
Definitely.
like you say, there's a lot of work to be done. Speaking of work to be done, I'm wondering, where do things stand kind of in the realm of access to treatment in Canada?
Great question. So part of our, one of the biggest barriers to care, obviously, to treatment in Canada is the cost. There are 7 Canadian provinces that do provide some type of financial support. All of the programs are different. In New Brunswick, we have a one-time $5,000 grant, which is wonderful because many provinces don't have that. But, when we consider that this is probably costing $20,000, $40,000, $60,000, it makes it inaccessible to patients from a financial perspective. But also, we live in a big country, and there are provinces that don't have fertility clinics to even access. So PEI, for example, does not have a fertility specialist, and they do not have a fertility clinic. So they have to leave the island in order to get access.
Wow.
So when you're thinking about equitable access across this country, if you're on a downtown street corner in Toronto, you have 20-ish clinics to choose from, and all of the best of the best of the best. And Ontario actually funds an IVF cycle, so they have provincial funding that can help alleviate some of that for patients. So it's not equitable, and we really need to consider that as a country when we do want equitable access to all healthcare in the country. So, if you're in Newfoundland, there are 2 amazing fertility specialists there and a fertility clinic that provides some care, but you can't do IVF, which is the most invasive type of treatment, but also the most effective and successful. So if you're in Gander, you need to fly, and so to another province that has a clinic. And so when you think of that access and the time off work, because this is not just I go to the doctor, I get pregnant, I come home, it's weeks and months and years of your life, and makes it very challenging for people who aren't close to a clinic to actually access the care that they really deserve.
And what about people going overseas? Because you're seeing that sometimes now too.
Yeah.
Is it because it's more accessible or cheaper?
Well, it depends. I mean, everybody's journey is different. So we have to remember it's healthcare, and that what is right for you is not the same protocol that would be successful for me. So some people choose to go overseas, for people potentially who need an embryo or an egg donor. Sometimes they do choose to go overseas, they make it a vacation, but we can access those things here on Canadian soil as well. It's just sometimes, you know, if you're in Atlantic Canada and you need to do that, flying to Toronto to have all that done is just as expensive as going to Prague.
Right.
So people make a decision based on a whole variety of things.
Okay. I mean, you could relax well in Prague and
Yes.
enjoy. There's not a whole lot of relaxing that happens in
vacation.
Toronto.
No. That's right.
I was kind of wondering, you had mentioned earlier with the top 5 banks in Canada, et cetera, that are adding these benefits in to kind of draw people in to their work. Do you find younger people are getting on the trend with freezing eggs at a younger age because they don't want, you know, they want their families later in life?
Yeah, absolutely. So fertility preservation, egg freezing is an incredibly important conversation. And it's really that younger generation of people with ovaries and eggs who can benefit. So there is a lot of work to be done, but there's an amazing swell of conversation online about young people. In fact, I just interviewed an amazing 25-year-old professional woman last week on our podcast, and she chose to freeze her eggs, but she didn't know about it. So this is a woman who is working on her PhD in health education and didn't know that this was an option until she sat at dinner with her sister, who's an MD, a physician, and asked her, like, what is your family planning? What are you thinking about your future family? She said, maybe you should consider freezing your eggs, because by the time this gal finishes school, she's going to be in her mid-30s. She wants to work for a bit. And she said, I didn't even know that was an option. And she kind of went viral on social media a couple of weeks ago. And it's really there's an under-education, but it's an incredible option that young people can access. And it's more of an insurance policy. It doesn't mean that just because you're going to freeze your eggs, that you're going to need to use them.
Right.
You may go on and find a partner or are ready to start your family. You get pregnant, and sort of like car insurance. I hate to you know, that kind of makes it sound a little.
But it's insurance. That's
insurance.
what the word insurance
Yeah,
really
that's
means.
right.
It's
Yeah.
that safety net of this is an option.
That's right. And so if more people with ovaries knew about it, I think that they would. I hear from people a lot that say, I wish I knew that, because there are people that end up getting to their early 30s who end up with an ovarian reserve issue and said, I wish someone had told me when I was 25 that I could have done this.
Right.
And so we really need to continue that education as part of curriculum within school and in universities. So super important for women especially.
Absolutely.
And also important is to let everyone know how they can access this information through your website, your podcast. Tell everyone where to find all the information.
Right, so we are Fertility Matters Canada. You can find us obviously through our website, fertilitymatters.ca, across all social media platforms, Fertility Matters or Fertility Canada on some of them. And our podcast is called Fertility in Focus across all podcast platforms.
Yep. Anywhere you want to find it, it's there. So.
And it'll be in the show notes too.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
We make it easy for you folks.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks,
nice to see
ladies.
you
I
again.
really appreciate it.